So hello, Internet. I'm spending the weekend, spending a little bit of time learning about Redis, and I'm going to combine that with a bit of Python. Um, I've played around with it very little, so it's going to be the first time for me to sort of dig into it a little bit more, and then sort of want to show what it's sort of like learning a new topic on your own. I think on the internet, there's a lot of great content out there in terms of video creators um, with videos with tutorials on how to do things, and everything's summed up really nicely. But I think really one of the most important things about becoming a developer is sort of the process of learning things on your own and developing a sense of how do I learn things, what kind of documents do I read, and sort of building a tool set for you to get started with new technologies. So Redis is going to be something new for me, and I just want to have you guys sort of join me along the journey of learning something new. So what I have here is a VS Studio Code IDE, just sort of something set up at the moment. And done a little bit of searching on the internet. And there are libraries out there for Python and with Redis. So you go Redis Python, and then we probably come up to a GitHub library sort of like this. And this one looks like a fairly popular repository. There's a lot of commits, so it looks like it's pretty active. It's been in development about 6 days ago. So I've taken a look at this a little while ago, and I thought this would be sort of a library that I want to take a look into and do some development with Python. So so this being the library I want to use, simply I just need to do a pip install Redis, and looks like that'll be sufficient for me to get it working. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and fire up a terminal inside of my IDE. I'm going to create a terminal here, and I'll just open up a terminal at the bottom. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a virtual environment for Python. And I'm going to call it pybin. And this is going to create a new Python binary, which is kept separate from the system Python. So it'll keep it separate from what I generally use, and if there are other libraries that are installed, there won't be clashes and stuff like that. So it'll keep things kind of clean. And then what I'll do next from there is I'll select interpreter, and this interpreter selection will allow me to pick the interpreter that I want to use. So since I installed the new binary under pybin, sort of expecting it to show up here. See if I can find it. Looks like it's not showing up here. So what I'm going to do is I'll just hit, oh look, looks like it's already selected actually. Let's go here underneath. Oh, sure it's the right one. So on 3.9, and then we'll go select interpreter. And what it'll do next, so open up another terminal at the bottom here, just to see that this pybin thing is showing up in the terminal. If I go which Python, it should also point to the Python interpreter that I just installed. So next thing we just saw here is going to go pip install Redis. So that seems to be the installation process. And I'm going to just go ahead and do that. Pip install Redis. Go ahead with the installation process. Just to make sure that it's working okay, I'll just type Python and I'll go import Redis. I think that's what it was. So it looks like it's installed okay. So that's the first step to get things going. Now the next thing that I want to do is get a version of Redis running. And so I've already got Docker installed on my PC over here. So what I want to do next is go and find a Docker image for me to install. And I've done a little bit of research on this, but I'll bring you along for the ride. So I'm going to go Docker Redis, and that should take me to a page where there are some Redis images. So I'm going to go to Docker Hub, and then it's going to come up to a page here, and there's going to be a whole bunch of different versions out here. And at first glance, so here are some Docker images, and with a bunch of tags. And it looks like the 7.0 version is still in release candidate phase, so this is not an official release yet. And the most recent one is 6.26, and I'm going to probably pick the Alpine version, because the Alpine version tends to be smaller in size for images. And then so I'm going to go ahead and set up a Redis container that's running, which I can connect to and then do some testing. So coming back to my IDE, just for the heck of it, I'm going to create a folder called Docker. And then inside of this folder, I'm going to create a file called docker compose.yaml. And what this is going to allow me to do is just going to have a file with some default settings for me to get a Docker version of Redis running. So I'm going to do version 3.6. That should be a string. And then services is going to be the list of containers with named containers that are going to be running. I'll just call this Redis. And then the image that we wanted to use is going to be 6.216 Alpine. So what I'll do is I'll go and highlight that. I'm going to go Redis and 0.26 Alpine. Ports, the default port for Redis is 6379. So that should be sufficient for me to get that going. And now that I have this Docker Compose file created, I'll go back from the terminal and go into the Docker directory. And starting a container using Docker Compose is kind of nice. Now, all you need to do is Docker Compose up, and I'm going to use and what this does is launch a process in the background. So what we'll see here is that the Docker process is now running. So just for a quick check, I'm going to do a telnet localhost. This is just going to check that the port is open. I'm going to go 6379, and it looks like it connected. So we've got a process running in the background. So the Redis server is running, so that's great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of screen. Oops. If I can just do it correctly. I don't know why it's not happy. I need to do hat. All right. Obviously, it just shows that I don't use telnet enough. So I think it's quit. All right. Enough of that. I'll just open a new terminal and then close that. Yes, even developers have bad days with the terminal. I'll create a new terminal instead. I'm back. And let's trash that and trash that. So now we have a Docker Compose. We'll have a Docker version of Redis running. Next thing we want to do is let's test out the connection. So we'll call it test redis.py. And Flake8 is not installed, so we'll install that. Also, let's get my formatter working, so install that as well. And with Python, I think according to the Git repository, I think it's going to be like a connect or something. Connect. Okay, there we go. So Redis. So we're going to look for that. So redis.redis. Then this looks like it's going to be the connect for me. So what I'm going to do, I'll just start with that. Import Redis, and then what I'll do, I'll go get Redis connection, and there seems to be a database name that's associated, and the idea would be return redis.redis, and host is going to be the localhost. Personally, I just use double quotes for quoting strings. Port 6379 was the magic number, 6379. And then database is going to be database. And we'll go from there. And I think my indentation was wrong. I know what's wrong. I was missing the colon at the end. And the auto formatting is working correctly. All right. And then getting kickstarted with this thing, looks like we are going to do our set and bar. So this is going to set some value. So Redis is supposed to be a key value store that's going to be storing a lot of values in memory. And that's one of the reasons why it's super fast, and it's going to be useful for things like caching. And yeah, it's supposed to be faster than needing going to a database and looking for values and stuff like that. So this is something that I'm kind of interested in experimenting with. Before I jump into using Redis with an application that's live, I want to get an understanding of the fundamental characteristics of what Redis does. So I'm going to follow this example over here. So I just call this the key value, the key, I'll call it foo. And then I'm going to do get a connection. So I'm going to go C is equal to get Redis connection, and I'll do like that for a connection. And I'm going to set key, and I'm going to set follow the example, which is going to be bar. And then let's also see what kind of value that comes out of this, because what it looks like is, yeah, so there's some kind of boolean that comes out, and then we get a string back. So let's also get print c.get, and that should be what is going on there. And then hit F9. For me, that's what's going to be used to run the script. And looks like we get something that's expected. So it returns true when I set a value, and then get a value back, which is the key, and then bar. So there's something kind of interesting here, is that the strings that come back looks like it's coming back as a binary string. So that's one interesting thing about Redis. Okay, so now we just sort of started this out with like a simple get according to this example over here. And what I want to do next is let's sort of see what other values I can put into here. So let's see. Can I do something like, we'll have this connection still alive, c.set, and I'll go integer and say what happens if I do a 2, and yeah, and I'll go print, and then print c.get integer. What else do I want to put? Let's see what happens if we do a float 2.0 and do a float and push F9. Oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. So we can see here, this is the original value that we put in the first time around, which is the bar as a string, comes back as a binary string. And the next one is we put an integer in, and that comes back as a 2 string. And then the same thing if we do this with a floating point integer, a floating point number, it comes back as 2.0. To me, that's a little bit unintuitive, because what it means is that when we store values inside of Redis, everything's going to be sort of a binary string. So one thing in my mind that I need to keep track of is when I store data in Redis and pull the values out, and that means I need to typecast them back to their original values. And then sort of the other annoying thing is that when you're setting values and stored inside of this Redis database, you have to know what kind of values you're storing where, and then how to bring them back. That's kind of one thing in my mind as well. And I'm sort of probably need to think about how that's going to get handled. And another, these are just really simple values that sort of got put in. And so this also makes me curious as to what kind of other types of data objects we can put in. So things like a list or a dict or something like that. And let's see what happens when we do that. So let's give that a try. And just for simplicity, I'm going to comment out this code. I'm going to go print c.set. I'm going to say, let's try a list and see what happens. I'm going to put in a list with 1, 2, and 3. And then let's see what happens if I get that. And I have a feeling that this is going to be weird, because everything is stored as a binary string. So let's see what happens. And yep, sort of what I expected. So it doesn't convert into a bytes very nicely. And then so I got something weird back. And then I'm probably going to expect the same thing to happen if I do it with a dictionary. So I'll do something like this. Hello world. And then we'll call this dict. And we're going to call this a get. Then see what happens here. So I'm expecting something similar to happen. I'm going to run the code, and yep, same thing. So that's kind of unpleasant in terms of working with data objects with Python and Redis. Is there's going to be some kind of translation that's needed to work with Redis. Okay, so I guess there are some other strategies to this. Probably the first one that comes to mind is we could just serialize everything using JSON. So what I could do instead is I could do something like import JSON. And what the JSON library does is just allows me to convert any sort of data object, well, basic Python types of data into a string. So my idea is I'm going to do something like, if I go json.dumps, and this is going to turn things into a string, and say if I have a list of like 1, 2, 4, print, and do a bracket like this, and it basically just turns it into a string. And so if we do something like this, print c.put set, and we'll call this JSON list. And then I'll get rid of that, and not a pint. Probably again thinking of beer already. See if that is sufficient. There is going to be something off with my brackets, so I'm going to need to fix that. JSON dumps. This should close the set. I don't need this one here. That's about right. And then print c.get JSON list. So this should give me the string back. Push F9. And that's expected, which is good. And this also means I can probably convert this back into the list data as JSON load s. And this will convert the string data back into a list. And lo and behold, that works. So one strategy that we can think of off the top of my head is that for simple gets and sets with anything other than simple strings and integers and floats, we'll need to do some kind of data manipulation and JSON things, converting things using the JSON dumps function to allow us to do things like add lists and maybe dictionaries as well. And I'll probably do a quick check on that, and that assumption should be right because everything's just going to be sort of the same thing. So if I go dict, and we'll just go like this, hello world. Yep. Dict. And after that, I'll just comment this part out, and bang. Yep, that is the output that is sort of expected. Seems a little bit cumbersome, but that's probably workable. And so this also leads to some other interesting things that I want to explore with Redis. Is that now at first glance of this is if I want to do things like cache values in sort of a cache, it means right now the way I'm doing things is that I'm gonna set a value and then I can get it back, and then I'll do something with it and I might set another thing back. So if I want to do things like maybe like counters or have other things going on, I just want to increment a value. If I store a number and if it's just a string, that comes a little bit not very I would say natural in terms of doing things, because you're going to get some kind of performance loss when you do multiple round trips to hit a caching layer, get the data, manipulate and save it back. So I'm sort of betting there should be some functionality within Redis that will let us get around with that. So what I'm going to do is actually, now that we've sort of taken a look at this at a first glance, I want to actually go back and take a look at the Redis documentation and see a little bit more about what's going on in there. I'm going to type in Redis documentation. Got the Redis over here. And yeah, there's some introduction to Redis. You can do things like transactions. pub sub. This is a publish subscribe kind of thing. Keys with time to live, so that means that I guess keys will expire. LRUs lookup and failover. So this probably means that you can have these Redis databases running as a cluster. Right now, I'm not too interested about this. I want to just figure out how do some of these commands work. And either client handling or cluster arguments. Looking here. How about let's just do something else? Let's say, I wonder if Redis can do things like increment and decrement and things like counters work. I go Redis increment. Oh, okay. There's an increment command. I've done a little bit of probing around, but I'm just bringing you guys along a little bit for sort of my discovery process. And then so there's this increment key, and then what it looks like is that you can do a set, and this is a key, and then this is a value, this is a string, and this is kind of a crazy thing here. It says increment this key, and it goes to become 11, and this is kind of crazy because you have a string which is a number, and somehow Redis is recognizing that the string is a number and then doing the incrementation. It's sort of like when you're working with Python, and then you have a string that's 11, and then you're trying to do an increment on it. That's sort of like that's a little bit crazy. So it's like saying that you have Python, and you have a string that's 11, and then you go a plus plus, and what would that be? And that doesn't make any sense. Or a plus equals 1, and that doesn't make sense because you're trying to manipulate a string with a increment on an integer. So to me, that's a little bit counterintuitive, but I guess we'll need to roll with that. And then I'm guessing, come back here, incr. There's an increment function or a call here, pipe. What I'm guessing is that since there's a get and a set here, and this is a connection, you can probably call increment from here. That's what I'm going to give a shot. Go back to this code, and let's try and make something here. Do is I'm going to change all this to increment, and I'll skip the dumps. We'll change this to a 10. Then I'm going to increment. Right, so it looks like the autocomplete understands this. And then I'm going to get the value out of this. And let's see what happens. And I'm going to run the code. Also get out of this interpreter. And run the code. And it looks like first line that runs here is we see that there's an increment and set works as true. We do increment, the value gets updated as a looks like an integer, and then when we get the value back from a get, it comes back as a binary string. So yeah, that's not too clean in terms of sort of how things are implemented, because you got to be aware that if you do an increment, you get an integer back, and then when you do a get the binary string back. Not very Pythonic, so there's probably there's a whole bunch of rough edges to deal with here, but something to be aware of. And then I'm going to also guess that there's going to be a decrement kind of function on this. So left DR, or let's find that function, decrement. There is DER. Okay. So DECR is there. And what I'm going to do is let's use the same thing. Use the same key, and we'll do DECR. Also run that. So what I should see is that it will that. Um, 11 comes from the increment, then we do a get, and then we decrement it by 1, and it becomes 10 and a binary 10. So that's kind of interesting. There are probably some other functionality in Redis, so let's sort of quickly dive into things with Redis. I wonder what other kind of data types that Redis can handle. So what I'm going to do here, this probably didn't spawn on another browser. I'll go Redis data types. Actually, how about Redis lists? See how that works. I was poking around earlier, and it looks like Redis has things called lists, and it's implemented differently from how Python is, how Python sort of works with lists. So what it looks like here is that there's some commands that says lpush and rpush, and if you have some experience working with lists, you can probably you're probably aware that you can insert elements into a list. And so what it looks like here is that Redis has created a way to push new values into a list using a left push and R push, which is on the left side of the list or on the right side of the list. And since it's L push and R push, I'm also guessing that there could be something something similar in this library over here that will let me to do that. So let's do another experiment and see how that works. So print, let's sort of copy stuff and get rid of that. And instead of a set, let's do an L push. Call this a list. And I'm going to say 1. See what happens. And the other question becomes, what happens if I get do a get on a list? Being super naive here, and then run the code, and yeah, it's complaining that the get is not working here. So, wrong kind of value. I wonder if there's a different way for me to get data back from. And so it looks like I'll do is I'll go Redis read list. So there's an L range and a function here coming up. What it looks like here is they're pushing R push, R push, R push, and then this one says L range, some key, and then 2 numbers. What it looks like for the documentation here, 0 and 10, 11 elements. So this probably means that this is a starting index and an end index. And what it probably means is that this 10 here could be inclusive. So it's 11 elements. So this means that it's inclusive. Okay, so this means it's inclusive. This is also kind of interesting here. This is a negative index. So I wonder what's going on with that, but I'll leave that out for now. So let's quickly sort of jump into things and see what's going on. So this is L range. This is the key. 0 and let's see, 0 and 2. Let's see sort of what happens. That seems to allow me to get data back, and I got 2 numbers back, 0 and 2. So what happens if I do this again? So 3. So indeed, this is probably the 3rd time I push the 1 into this list, and then when I do an L range, it's getting between the 0th index up to the 2nd index, inclusive. So this is going to be 3 values. This is also somewhat counterintuitive with Python, because if you do things like a loop and you have a counter, you usually use like sort of just like a less than, and then you'll get 1 less value back. So that is going to be one other edge case to sort of have in your mind to know when you're working with lists in Redis. And I'm going to do one more thing. Since every time I'm running this code, I'm adding stuff to the list, so that's sort of manipulating it. I wonder if there's a way to delete that. Come back here, and I'm gonna go ahead and look for Redis delete and guess del. Is it del to delete? So this is the other thing about working with new things quick is that sometimes you don't have to read everything. You can, if you've developed sort of a intuition with how things work over time, you might be able to sort of impute things without needing to read all the documentation. Of course, I don't recommend not reading documentation, but if you want to learn things quickly, having sort of a intuition about how things work and having a sense of what to expect out of an API will help you along in terms of learning new things. So let's see if del works. Okay, so instead of del, we get delete. So also check that, and let's do an L range after this. What happened? Let's just do it like that. And what it seems to have happened is that we get a 1 and an empty list back, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, so it seems to work as expected. So this sort of 1 here, this return value, I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head why it returns a 1. Maybe it's a 1 for it's okay, or it's successful, or something like that. Right, so we say delete. Okay, so it looks like here it says key 1, 2, and 3, and looks like there's 1 and 2 keys that were created. The third key doesn't exist, and this tells me the number of keys that was deleted. Huh. Okay, so I guess that's the way it sort of works. So yeah, so this took maybe about how long did it take? This is a sort of a 30-minute introduction of sort of a quick hacking around with Redis, trying to figure out how it works, installing, getting it running with Docker Compose, installing a pip library, getting a virtual environment going, the process of reading the docs in terms of getting a connection to it, and doing a telnet to get see that the port is open, that it's actually running, and then sort of quickly glancing at the documentation to see what kind of functions are there, sort of first impressions about how it works, and then sort of just going from there. And this is sort of really what the developer experience is really about when it comes to learning new things. So thank you very much for joining me, and hopefully I'll catch you again in the next video. Thank you, and bye-bye.